Part 2 of this video. Well, Paul Wolfowitz chimes in on the situation, and I'm sure you'll find it interesting. He's evidently trying to persuade President Obama to take a firmer stance against the Iranian regime and the election results so far. So he writes an op-ed in the Washington Post yesterday saying President Obama's first response to the protests in Iran was silence, followed by a cautious, almost neutral stance designed to avoid meddling in Iranian affairs. I am reminded of Ronald Reagan's initial neutral response to the crisis following the Philippine elections of 1986. In 1986, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos had called a snap election, calculating that a divided opposition would hand him a clear victory that would undercut pressure from the Reagan administrations for broad-based reform. Instead, the opposition parties united behind Corazon Aquino, and only massive fraud could produce a victory for Marcos. Now, we all know how that ended up, with Marcos basically having to go into exile. And Mr. Wolfowitz seems to have a very selective memory when it comes to the Philippines and our interference in it, because it was the United States who propped up the dictator Ferdinand Marcos for years and years without question. So he goes on to say he makes other points here. He quotes Defense Secretary Dick Cheney had argued consistently for the United States in the peaceful aspirations of the Russians, Ukrainians, and other Soviet people, and so on. So this is, you see, this is the referring to my first part of this video. This is what we're talking about here, is fomenting color revolutions, when we should have no business interfering with the internal affairs of other nations. And but the reform the Iranian demonstrators seek is something that we should be supporting. And in such a situation, the United States does not have a no comment option, says Wolfowitz. Coming from America, silence is itself a comment, and comment in support of those holding power, and against those protesting the status quo. Here comes the best part. It would be a cruel irony if, in an effort to avoid imposing democracy, the United States were to tip the scale towards dictators who impose their will on people struggling for freedom. You know, Iran, the regime of Iran is hardly a dictatorship, for one thing. And you know, when people like Wolfowitz start talking about imposing democracy on other countries, perhaps we should all consider what they actually mean by that, because how it's going to turn out is probably the same way it turned out by us imposing democracy in Iraq, with the result of 1 million people, 1 million Iraqi people dead, and our service members still in that country with no end in sight. So, as I say, take everything with a grain of salt. I don't think what we're seeing here is as easy or as simple as it looks. Thanks for listening.